Automatic feeders have been a game changer for so many pet parents, myself included. Gordon eats at least one of his meals every single day from a automatic feeder. That being said, probably the biggest problem with most feeders on the market now is the vast majority of them only allow for dry food. But over the past few weeks, I've been trying out the new feeder from PETLIBRO, which is the Polar Wet Food Feeder. And this feeder allows for wet food. And I was excited, Gordon was excited to try it. So let's talk about our experience. I think the funniest thing about the Polar Wet Food Feeder was Gordon's reaction to it. I was not expecting him to have the reaction that he did when he first tried out food from this feeder, but I'll talk more about his reaction later. First, let's talk about a little bit more of the details. When it comes to automatic feeders in general, there's a few different pros and cons to keep in mind. So there's a lot of benefits of having an automatic feeder if you've never tried one before. So the biggest benefit is just the convenience. Your cat can still eat a consistent schedule every single day, even if you are not home or you're at work or sleeping in or whatever the case is. Also allows for more easy portion control, and it allows you to more easily spread out meals at consistent times throughout the day. That being said, there's definitely some negatives when it comes to automatic feeders and some things you should keep in mind and look out for because not all feeders are created equal. Now, the first thing to keep in mind in terms of the negatives is some feeders are more easily susceptible to break-ins than others. So you need to watch out for what type of security measures that feeder has to prevent your cat from stealing food. The second thing to keep in mind is, especially if you have multiple cats in your household, it's not always easy to tell which cat is eating the food and which ones is not. So if you have multiple cats, you want to pay attention to those type of features. And then number three, the vast majority of automatic feeders for cats only allow you to put in dry food, which is a shame because wet food is super beneficial for cats. It makes it a lot easier for them to get hydrated because it's much more hydrating than dry food. It also tends to be less processed and have less carbohydrates, which are not the best thing for your cat, especially if you are trying to watch their weight. So that is one thing I was really excited about for the Polar Wet Food Feeder, because I know for me personally, whenever I'm going out of town or I'm on a work trip or something, I oftentimes am not able to feed Gordon his normal wet food schedule. And in those cases, I often just have to set his dry food to give him an extra meal. And I always feel bad about it because I feel like not only am I sad about him just sitting at home alone, but then I'm also thinking about the fact that he needs to eat just more dry food when I know he really prefers the wet food. So that's why I think the biggest selling point of this automatic feeder is the fact that it does allow you to feed your cat wet food even when you're not there. The Polar Wet Food Feeder is $129.99. However, thanks to PETLIBRO for sponsoring this video and also giving us a custom discount code. You can use the code CATS16 at checkout, which will give you 16% off. So you can think of this feeder almost as like a little tiny mini fridge for your cat's food. So it uses semiconductor cooling technology to refrigerate basically your cat's food and keep it cool while the food is in the feeder. It can also store up to 3 meals at a time and can keep them cool for up to 3 days. So it has this tray with 3 different compartments, and you just put the wet food into the 3 compartments and then put that tray into the feeder. My only wish list, I guess, is I do wish there was options to have more than just 3 meals, but it's definitely a huge improvement over most feeders that don't allow wet food at all. So that's definitely a huge win. Another thing I did like is while this feeder is AC power controlled, so you do plug it into the wall, it does also have a safety feature where if there is a power outage, it will still continue with the scheduled meals for up to 12 hours. So I know for me, that gives me a huge amount of peace of mind. I mean, I don't have a lot of power outages here, but just in case I do, it is nice to know that Gordon is not going to have to go without his meal if that's the case. And I also just really like how this feeder looks. I think a lot of feeders do have a tendency to be a little bit ugly, and this one I think is very sleek. It looks like a nice round spaceship or something. I also like that it's kind of low and close to the ground, so I think the chances that your cat would be able to totally tip it over would be pretty minimal. The physical setup of the Polar Wet Food Feeder is incredibly easy. There's really not any setup really at all. Like there's no pieces you have to really assemble together. Everything is pre-assembled. So all you have to do is take the feeder out of the box, take the cord, plug the cord into the feeder, and then plug the cord into the wall. After that, it's pretty much set up. So the only thing you'll have to do at that point is connect the feeder with the app. Now, if you have never used a PETLIBRO feeder before, you will have to download the app, get a profile set up for your cat, and then do a little bit of connecting in terms of setting up the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth connecting your feeder with the app and everything like that. But that was a pretty easy process. I walked through that in my last review of the PETLIBRO 1 automatic feeder. And since I already had the app set up from that last review, and because Gordon has already been using a PETLIBRO feeder, the PETLIBRO 1, for his dry food, he already had his profile set up in the app. The app was already downloaded to my phone. So that part was really already done. So all I had to do was open up the app on my phone, plug in the new feeder, and the app immediately recognized the new feeder. So that was really easy. And then the final step in terms of setup is you will have to put food into the feeder, of course. So there are 3 containers for 3 portions of food with this feeder. So you will have to pop out the tray, open up 3 cans of food or whatever you want to put in there, and then put them in those 3 compartments. Then you'll pop back the tray into the feeder, and then in the app, you can set up your feeding schedule. So it's really pretty easy to use and really pretty customizable. So you can set up the feeder to go up to 3 days in advance. And then the final step is just to set up the feeding schedule that you want in the app. It's really pretty customizable. You can set up any time of day, or anything like that up to 3 days in advance. You can't select any meals beyond 3 days. I think this is just a safety mechanism in terms of the freshness, because they only guarantee that the food will stay fresh in there for up to 72 hours. So because of that, it won't let you set up a feeding schedule that's beyond 3 days in advance. But I do like that. It adds a bit of peace of mind that I'm not accidentally going to give Gordon spoiled food, but you can set it to recur so you won't have to redo the times every single time. And then you also set the duration of the feeding, and you can set it up to 1 hour. So for me, I think Gordon will eat his food in much faster time than 1 hour, but just to give him a little bit more wiggle room, I did set the maximum duration of meal time. So for example, for dinner, I set it to start at 5 p.m. and go till 6 p.m. I think the other big selling point of this feeder is the app. And one thing I particularly like is if you have multiple PETLIBRO feeders, like I have the PETLIBRO RFID 1, and then also now the Polar wet food feeder, one for dry food and one for wet food. I like that I can have both of them on the same app. So it has both of them here, and I just click into the one I want. So if I want to look at the, let's see, I'll click into the Polar wet food feeder here. I can set the meal schedule. I can also select it to feed now if I don't want to wait, or if I realize I forgot to schedule it, I could just have it feed Gordon immediately. I can also see the log of when Gordon's eaten. So I really like this feature because especially if I'm traveling, I still know that Gordon is alive, because if I see food logs for him, I'm like, okay, Gordon is still eating, he's still doing his thing. So I always really like that. My only small wish list when it comes to the app is I think it would be cool if they had a combined log. So right now you have to check each individual feeder individually and see what the food log is. It would be cool if there was like a unified log where you can see all of the feeding of both of them in one timeline. That would be cool. And I also wish that they told you how much wet food your cat was eating. So they do tell you the duration of how long that they were feeding for, but they don't tell you the amount. So I think that would be a cool feature. But it's almost time. It's almost time. It's 4:55 and Gordon's feeder is set to go off at 5. So we'll check it out. We'll check it out when it goes off. Now, as you can see, Gordon is loving his new feeder, but probably the funniest thing about trying this feeder was seeing his reaction the first time he tried out the Polar wet food feeder, because even though it does warm up the food a little bit so it's not frozen or anything when it comes out, it's definitely cold. It's definitely cooler than his normal room temperature food, and he was like very skittish about it the first time. He was just not used to cold food whatsoever. He's normally eating either room temperature food from a can or from his feeder, so that was probably the funniest thing. But now, as you can see, he seems like he's totally accustomed to it. The only other thing that I think was a little bit of a learning curve for Gordon was getting used to the fact that the meals are only going to be open for 1 hour. In the first few times he tried this feeder, he did leave a little bit of food left in the bowl, and I think he just assumed that he'd come back to it later. Sometimes he does that with his wet food. He'll kind of pick at it over a few hours. But with this feeder, it will close after 1 hour. So just keep that in mind. There may be a little bit of a transition period before they realize that this feeder will close back up again. While Gordon's eating, I'm just gonna take the temperature of the food right after it came out just to see how cool it is. Gordon, if you don't mind. So it comes out just at 49 degrees Fahrenheit. What is that in Celsius? 9.6 degrees Celsius, so a little chilly. It's colder than room temperature, but it's not frozen. And now that Gordon is used to it, he seems to be enjoying it just fine. Chowing down. This feeder also has what they call PAW Shield technology, which is basically, they made it pretty hard for cats to break in. So even if I try to open the lid here with my hands, I cannot open this, and Gordon has not been able to break into it. They also have a pretty small amount of buttons, which just make it easier for your cat to like accidentally hit something. There's really only one button, which is this main power button, but you really have to like push into it, which I think would be pretty hard for a cat to do. Even I have to like really kind of like press in there to get it to pop open. So it's not just like gonna pop open if your cat like accidentally brushes against it or something like that. So this feeder does have anti-pinch technology. So basically what that means is it should not sort of pinch your cat if they're actively eating at the end of the feeding window. So it is, let's see. So right now it is 5:59 and this is supposed to close at 6. So I'm gonna try to keep my hand in here and see how it works and check this anti-pinch technology in action. Okay, so it opened back up. It definitely put a little bit of pressure on my finger, but it was definitely not pinching or anything like that. And once it realized that I wasn't going to move, that it just opened back up. So yeah, that's a little bit of a safety mechanism if you're worried about it sort of closing in on your cat. So overall, I had a really great experience using this feeder. I think it's easy to set up, easy to use. Gordon had a good experience. I had a good experience. There's really not much negative that I ran into with this feeder. So overall, I think it works as advertised. So if you have any other questions, definitely let me know down in the comments. Or if you have other suggestions of what feeder you would like me to try out, I'll definitely be checking out the comments for those suggestions. And thanks for watching. Bye.